The first time I preached, I was only 18. My church did senior sermons, so graduating seniors got to get up, and we were told we only got 3 minutes, which was not a problem for me, to tell our story, to respond to the word. And so I got up there and I spoke about magic. I talked about the simple magic of the world, of love, of community, of generosity, of the miracles of the everyday. And I talked about those miracles in my life. And for most of it, I was terrified, and for most of it, I cried. It is both a joy and a terror to be known, to show a part of who we truly are to those around us. It's a little bit harder when you're standing up high and there's spotlights on you, but it's always difficult to be vulnerable, to say out loud who you are. It started when I was 18 and it went on for many years, telling my story in different ways. Sometimes through music, sometimes through poetry. At L'Arche, I was taught about the sacred story and the structure of the sacred story, which was more than words, but also scent and taste and feeling and memory. The sacred story, the way we all move through this world, who that makes us and who we are when we try to share it. There are many different ways to tell the world who you are. You tell the world who you are in the way that you dress, in the way that you say hello, in the way that you get to and from work, in the way that you are at coffee hour or not at coffee hour, as some prefer. We tell the world who we are in so many different ways. I was speaking to someone recently who was feeling frustrated. His church had had a retreat, and not once in that entire day of retreat and restoration and church did they use the word Jesus. And he felt frustrated. He felt like that's step one. If we are going to talk about who we are, that is step one. And certainly Jesus means different things to different people. But I understood his frustration because for him, naming Jesus was part of how he let the world know who he is. And he wanted to do that in his community. Yesterday, some of us gathered to make the palm crosses that you have received today. And when we ran out of palm crosses to make, we put some candy and some eggs. Glad the kids are downstairs so they don't know that it wasn't the Easter Bunny who did that. And then when we were done with that, many of us took up our signs and we went out to Weidler Street. And we held our signs high. And the signs said lots of different things, but they said who we are and who we wanted the world to know us to be. I wore my collar so that people would know that part of who I am. And I carried a sign that said, "Love them as you love yourself, where you were foreigners in Egypt once." And it was a beautiful time. We didn't really even talk that much about why we were there. We just talked about our lives and the things going on that day or how we felt. But we held up the signs. And as people drove by, we would wave and they would honk. And they would wave back, or they would give a thumbs up or a peace sign. And it was beautiful, and there was such camaraderie. But that's not all that happened. There were other hand signs that happened. And they weren't maybe as friendly as we wanted them to be. And it was startling, especially, quite frankly, in this city. You don't get a whole lot of pushback, perhaps, for the kinds of signs that we are holding, but nonetheless, we got it. And I felt shaken by it. And I turned to the group to make sure everybody was okay, and one of the people there, one of our parishioners, said, "We're going to love them anyways." And I thought, oh yeah, we're not just doing this for the cheers. We're not just doing this for being with people who believe what we believe. We're doing this because we love everyone. Because that's what Jesus told us to do. We are not doing it because it is without risk or without judgment or without anger to stand out there and say who we are. And then once more today, we would go out onto Weidler, and in a different way, we would say who we are, singing hymns and waving our palms and getting a little damp, telling the world who we are. As they so often drive by and wonder what kind of brown building that is. Today they saw who we were, who we are. A group of people full of love and celebration and joy, not afraid of the ramifications, at least in that moment of being honest about who we are. Jesus knew he was going to his death. Whether that's because God had told him or because he could read the writing on the wall, he knew that going back to Jerusalem would be difficult and painful and dangerous. And he did it openly and honestly, and the people who knew him and loved him, the people who had seen him heal, who had received his sustenance, who had received his word, surrounded him with joy. And maybe some of them knew and some of them didn't know what would happen if they loudly announced themselves into the city. Maybe some of them knew and some of them didn't know that Jesus would die in that city. Maybe some of them knew and some of them didn't know, because how can you really know that Jesus would come back? There were so many possibilities in that moment, and yet they showed up with joy and love in their occupied capital and said who they were. They were followers of Jesus. How do you tell the world who you are? How do you show up? How do you experience joy even in the face of danger and fear and judgment? One of the ways we are able to do so is because we know what happens after the death. That Christ comes back, and that we have done good by loving one another. And when we fail to stand up and say who we are because it's scary and vulnerable, we will be forgiven. How do you tell the world who you are? With a story? With a sign? With a joyful noise? However you do it on purpose. Do it with love in your heart. Do it knowing that you are not alone. Amen.